The United Nations General Assembly begins in New York. It's meant to address poverty, inclusion, and climate change. Chavista lawmakers in Venezuela return to the opposition-controlled National Assembly as part of the agreement on dialogue. And the British Parliament is to resume on Wednesday after the Supreme Court ruled Prime Minister Boris Johnson's decision to suspend Parliament unlawful. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Doris Polo in Quito, and this is From the South. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has emphasized economic inequality and climate change while speaking at the start of the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Addressing world leaders, he also criticized the recent attacks on oil facilities in Saudi Arabia. The UN Secretary General further announced his support for a meeting between US President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. World leaders have gathered at the UN amid tight security to discuss global issues under this year's theme, galvanizing multilateral efforts for poverty eradication, quality education, climate action, and inclusion.
The climate emergency is a race we are losing, but it is a race we can win if we change our ways now. Even our language has to adapt. What once was called climate change is now truly a climate crisis. And what was once called global warming has more accurately become global heating. We are seeing unprecedented temperatures, unrelenting storms, and undeniable science. 10 days ago, in the Bahamas, I saw the ruin caused by Hurricane Dorian. That aftermath is a mere prelude to what science tells us is on its way. But something else is on its way, solutions. And the world is starting to move, not yet fast enough, but move in the right direction, away from fossil fuels and towards the opportunities of a green economy. And the Climate Summit highlighted some of the solutions we need to scale up in order to dramatically reduce emissions, keep temperatures rise to 1.5 degrees, and reach carbon neutrality by 2050.
Now, delivering the first speech at the UN General Assembly, Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro spoke on sovereignty and independence and hit back at critics who have said the raging Amazon fires are a global problem. He also defended his government, which he says has sought to preserve the environment. However, critics, including indigenous peoples, have argued that Bolsonaro's policies are the reasons for the wildfires, which have destroyed thousands of hectares of Brazil's Amazon.
It is a fallacy to say that the Amazon is the heritage of humankind, and a misconception as confirmed by scientists to say that our Amazonian forests are the lungs of the world. Using and resorting to these fallacies, certain countries, instead of helping, embarked on the media lies and behaved in a disrespectful manner and with a colonialist spirit. They even called into question that which we hold as the most sacred value, our sovereignty. One of these countries during a recent G7 meetings dared suggest applying sanctions to Brazil without even consulting with or hearing Brazil. I thank those countries that did not accept to go ahead with this absurd proposal.
Also speaking at the UN General Assembly, US President Donald Trump blasted China on world trade and went on to threaten to increase sanctions against Iran as he slammed the country's bloodlust. He further noted that while the United States wants peace with North Korea, he will continue to seek the United States' interests.
All nations have a duty to act. No responsible government should subsidize Iran's bloodlust. As long as Iran's menacing behavior continues, sanctions will not be lifted. They will be tightened.
Cuba's President Bruno Rodriguez has rejected the slander against his country perpetuated by Brazil's president at the UN General Assembly. Jair Bolsonaro accused the Cuban government of exploiting the International Medical Corps and using them to implement a dictatorship. Cuba's president retorted that Bolsonaro should treat with corruption within Brazil's justice, government and family systems instead. He also accused Bolsonaro of missing the dictatorship and being responsible for the rise in inequality in Brazil. Shifting gears now, Chavista lawmakers in Venezuela have returned to the opposition-controlled National Assembly. The 50-strong group of elected representatives from the United Socialist Party and its allies rejoined the Assembly's activities as part of the agreement signed with some opposition parties a week ago. President Nicolas Maduro said they would seek to work with other members to overcome the National Assembly's breach of the Constitution. This currently means its decisions are null and void. Uruguay says it will withdraw from the Inter-American Treaty of Reciprocal Assistance, or TR, if its members approve military intervention against Venezuela. The Uruguayan foreign minister pointed out that the treaty cannot be applied against Venezuela since the country is not a member. He also said that countries that are pushing for military intervention ignore the intrinsic value of the treaty since it was designed for the defense of member countries against external aggression. TR member nations later decided to impose more sanctions on Venezuela, but for the moment ruled out using military force. 16 countries voted for the resolution, with Uruguay against and Trinidad and Tobago abstaining.
The Brazilian government understands clearly that the impact of the Inter-American Treaty of Reciprocal Assistance, or the Rio Treaty, regarding the situation in Venezuela is a very sensitive issue. But we also know that special circumstances require exceptional response.
Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro has arrived in Russia for an official visit that aims to strengthen the bilateral relationship between the two countries. During his visit, President Maduro is holding bilateral talks with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. Now, the talks will focus on boosting the political and economic ties between the two allies. British MPs are expected to resume sitting on Wednesday after the Supreme Court ruled Prime Minister Boris Johnson's decision to suspend Parliament unlawful. House Speaker John Bercow instructed his officials to prepare for the House of Commons to resume work at 11:30 a.m. Early on Tuesday, the Supreme Court ruled that the Prime Minister acted unlawfully when he advised Queen Elizabeth to suspend Parliament, effectively stopping MPs from carrying out their duties in the run-up to Brexit. The court's 11 presiding judges ruled unanimously. Several MPs have since called for Johnson's resignation.
The Court is bound to conclude, therefore, that the decision to advise Her Majesty to prorogue Parliament was unlawful because it had the effect of frustrating or preventing the ability of Parliament to carry out its constitutional functions without reasonable justification. The second question, therefore, is what the effect on the fundamentals of our democracy was extreme. No justification for taking action with such an extreme effect has been put before the Court.
Meanwhile, opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn has called on Boris Johnson to call an election.
Demand that he obeys the law that's been passed by Parliament and recognise that our Parliament is elected by our people to hold our government to account. A Labour government would want to be held to account. We wouldn't bypass democracy. And I invite Boris Johnson, in the historic words, to consider his position. become the shortest serving Prime Minister there's ever been. So, obey the law, take no deal off the table, and have an election to elect a government that respects democracy, that respects the rule of law, and brings power back to the people, not usurps it in the way that Boris Johnson has done.
In response to the court's ruling, Prime Minister Boris Johnson said he will respect the verdict, but Brexit will still go ahead on October 31st as planned.
Obviously, this is a verdict that we will respect, and we respect the judicial process. I have to say I strongly disagree with what the justices have found. I don't think that it's right, but we will go ahead, and of course Parliament will come back. I do think there's a good case for getting on with the Queen's speech anyway, and we'll do that. But I think the most important thing is we get on and deliver Brexit on October the 31st. And there's clearly the claimants in this case are determined to try to frustrate that and to stop that. I think it'd be very unfortunate if Parliament made that objective, which the people want delivered, more difficult. But we'll get on.
Our correspondent, Pablo Navarrete in London, explains the situation.
Today, the UK Supreme Court, the highest judicial authority in the land, announced that the decision by Boris Johnson to suspend Parliament, taken 2 weeks ago, was illegal in a judgment that has shocked many. They've said that the decision is illegal, and now the President of the Parliament, John Bercow, has called the MPs to return to Parliament for tomorrow morning. Now, the leader of the opposition party, the main opposition party, Jeremy Corbyn, the Socialist leader, has said that this decision shows the contempt that Boris Johnson has for Parliament, and has called on him to resign, effectively saying he should consider his position. Now, Boris Johnson has said he will respect the decision, although he doesn't agree with it, but that he remains intent on leaving the European Union by the 31st of October. Now, questions have also been asked about the role of the Queen in agreeing to the initial suspension of Parliament, and there are also calls for Boris Johnson to resign from even within people from his own party. So the pressure increases on Boris Johnson. It is unclear whether he will survive this judgment by the Supreme Court, but tomorrow, with the MPs returning to Parliament, will be another very dramatic day in British politics, and we'll wait to see what happens.
That was Pablo Navarrete with that report. We'll take a short break now. When we come back, Tropical Storm Lorenzo is strengthening and will likely become a hurricane. Don't go away.
A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis, and induces criticism, because every event has a context.
Pusimos el punto en I.
Dotting the I. Saturdays, only on Telesur. The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transform the world today. On Monday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Tropical storm Lorenzo, which formed far in the eastern Atlantic Ocean on Monday, continued to strengthen overnight and is expected to become a large and powerful hurricane. So far, most models predict Lorenzo will remain over open waters and only poses a threat to shipping channels. At 5 a.m., the storm was located about 499 kilometers southwest of the southernmost Cabo Verde Islands. Lorenzo had maximum winds of 105 kilometers per hour and was moving toward hurricane-friendly weather. Meanwhile, on the heels of a 6.3 earthquake late on Monday, Puerto Rico is bracing for inclement weather due to the reformation of Tropical Storm Karen. The National Hurricane Center says Karen will move either over or near Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, where tropical storm warnings are in effect. Now, the storm is expected to bring heavy rainfall, flash floods, and mudslides. The NHC says heavy rains and potential flooding will likely continue into Wednesday, even as the center moves away. The Bahamas government has appointed a new disaster management minister. Iram Lewis was sworn in as head of the newly established Ministry of Disaster Preparedness, Management and Reconstruction. Bahamas Prime Minister Hubert Minnis had announced on Sunday the establishment of a new ministry responsible for coordinating recovery of the Abaco and Grand Bahama following the devastation caused by Hurricane Dorian through the northwest of the Atlantic archipelago. In Nicaragua, President Daniel Ortega and Vice President Rosario Murillo led a celebration at the Plaza de la Revolucion in recognition of the 40th anniversary of the National Police. The president highlighted the triumphs of the police force, which has been able to guarantee security in a way no other country in the region has in recent years. At the same time, he remarked on the violence which took place in 2018 when members of the police force were attacked and in some cases killed, as sectors of the opposition destroyed health centers and other public buildings. Police officers and members from Cuba, Russia, Bolivia, Venezuela and other close neighbors participated in the activity.
On this 40th anniversary, all honor and all glory of the homeland to the National Police for its 40th anniversary.
We not only remember, commemorate the 40 years of struggles and victories of our national police, we are remembering and commemorating the founding and our commander, Tomás Borge, with all of his enthusiasm and vitality, designing a police of the people and at the service of the people.
In Venezuela, the National Dialogue Table continues to make political and economic progress. All parties agree that dialogue should prevail over violence.
1 week since the creation of the dialogue table between the government of Venezuela and the opposition, the dialogue continues to bear fruits. Among its achievements was the freeing of the vice president of the National Assembly who took part in the failed coup attempt of April 30th. Another achievement was the incorporation of a former presidential candidate. They are now focusing on the development of thematic panels.
Today's meeting focused on establishing agreements. We also set an agenda for the next coming days. We have decided to create 8 panels that will give an update in 20 days from now, so that people can give an opinion on what we are doing. We want people to know how the dialogue process is progressing.
The dialogue tables are: table for the review of electoral power and proportional representation, table to evaluate prisoners, table for sovereignty and territorial integrity, national economy table in order to find solutions and review the proposed program of exchanging oil for food, medicine and basic needs, and to condemn the blockade and sanctions, political rights table that will work on the coexistence of popular powers and the work of the National Constituent Assembly, social rights, public services and migration table, political parties, revolutionaries and opposition table, social movements table. The dialogue table is also backed by Russia, China, Uruguay, Mexico, Cuba, Norway. They agree that dialogue should be prevail over violence.
We have always said that these negotiations are complementary. If talks in Norway are re-established, they will be complementary to the national dialogue table. There are no confrontations. We are just looking for a political and constitutional way to end the conflict the country is facing.
1 week of the national dialogue has produced more progress than the 8 months of the violent confrontation led by Juan Guaidó.
We have maintained our position of dialogue and peace. We want to reach agreements that will consolidate peace in the region. Venezuela is a country of peace, in spite of the threats it faces by the right wing and U.S. imperialism.
We will keep moving forward. There is nothing that will stop this negotiation. We will continue working towards this direction in order to get important results.
In response to the progress made at the dialogue table, President Maduro announced that the Chavista political force that had withdrawn from the National Assembly will be back on September 24.
Coming up, Turkey's president says he will continue to seek justice for murdered Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Stay with us.
We are present at every event where our nations are staring. We believe in a new global vision, united in every broadcasting. We keep expanding our horizons and working on a closer and better communication. Now, in Grenada, Telesur, the new source from South America and the Caribbean.
Welcome back. Spain's Supreme Court has ruled in favor of exhuming the remains of the country's late dictator Francisco Franco. The move had been one of the flagship policies of acting Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's Socialist Party government, but was met with opposition from the Franco family and divided Spain over the legacy of the dictatorship that ended with Franco's death in 1975. The top court unanimously ordered to remove Franco's remains from a state mausoleum and rebury it at a less controversial site. The government's plans to have them buried at the cemetery before November's election. Dozens of protesters, many victims of Franco's regime, gathered outside the court to celebrate the decision.
A fascist, Nazi dictator like Franco cannot be publicly recognized in the Valley of the Fallen, or in the Almudena Cathedral, or in any public site. The remains should be given to the family to be kept in the family site.
Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has vowed to continue seeking justice for murdered Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Erdogan said despite resistance from certain countries, his government will continue pursuing all those involved for the murder of the late journalist who was killed inside Saudi Arabia's consulate in Turkey last year. Saudi Arabia initially denied any knowledge of his whereabouts after he went missing, but later admitted that he was killed inside its consulate.
Although some don't want it, we will continue to seek justice for journalist Jamal Khashoggi and Egypt's President Mohamed Morsi.
As members of the South African Society of Banking Officials, SASBO, the country's largest financial union, will hold a nationwide strike on Friday in protest against planned job cuts. According to the union's general secretary, more than 40,000 workers are expected to down tools on September 27th. The strike is in response to plans by the country's three largest banks to retrench almost 10,000 workers across the country. In Algeria, 8 babies have been killed when a fire ripped through a maternity hospital. Firefighters managed to rescue 11 babies, over 100 women and the hospital staff after a fire broke out in a hospital in the town of Oued Souf in the night. The cause of the fire is still unknown, but authorities have launched an investigation into the case. Tens of thousands of students gathered across Indonesia to protest against the criminalization of sex outside of marriage and weakening of anti-corruption laws, among other issues. Police deployed tear gas and water cannons to disperse protesters who took to the streets over issues like criminalization of premarital sex and jail terms for abortions outside of medical emergencies or rape. A separate bill would weaken the investigative power of the graft-riddled Indonesia's corruption-fighting agency. Contenders in the recently ended Israeli elections have held their first meeting to discuss formation of a unity government. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is under pressure after failing to garner enough votes to form a government, met with his rival Blue and White Party leader Benny Gantz for the first time after the election in Jerusalem. Israeli President Reuven Rivlin mediated between the two rivals. Both Gantz and Netanyahu are vying to become prime minister after receiving the backing of minority parties.
We wanted to form a right-wing government. Unfortunately, this was not possible. We simply didn't get enough votes to do so. Gantz on his part wanted to form a government from the opposing side, and he also didn't get enough votes to do so. Therefore, the only government that can be formed under these circumstances is a white unity government with both of us. And the only way to reach such a government is to sit down and talk.
And as we go, we leave you with tunes from the women's musical group of Brazil's landless movement. They joined thousands at the March for Peace this weekend in Caracas in solidarity with the people of Venezuela. And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, remember you can find us on Starsa channel 461 in South Africa and channel 539 in Nigeria. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for Telesur English. I'm Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.